What's up, guys? A horrific nightmare 0-3 day yesterday, which I think is is that 2 losing days in a row? I don't even know at this point. Everything about that was awful, especially the Chicago Bulls just teasing me after they were way behind in that game. Although I think the game was closer than the score would indicate if you look at the box score stats for that one. But they clawed their way back into it and got to within 3 in I don't know, late in the third quarter, maybe it was even the fourth quarter. And it's like, come on, man. Like, they get to within the number for just that small period of time, and they're not going to cover. Like, why even tease me? Like, just lose by 20 and get it over with already. And then, of course, they did not cover. I think they lost by way more than the final score doesn't really indicate what actually happened in the game, I don't think, but certainly it was a loss. The Seattle hockey game wasn't as bad as the score looked either. There was an empty netter there. That was a 0-0 game into the second period, and there was one burst of 2 goals for Pittsburgh that kind of just took the game away and ended the game. So that sucked as well. Statistically, that game was Pittsburgh did outshoot Seattle, but Seattle was the more physical team. So it was like, I don't know. And then Philadelphia Eagles, I expected them to show up, and they didn't. I mean, it's as simple as that. Like, way too many of the talking heads and like everybody was picking Tampa Bay. It seemed like nobody had any faith in the Eagles, and I like to buck those narratives, like buck that public sentiment. The Eagles, I still think, are the better of the two teams, and if they showed up, I think they would have been able to do something in that game, but they did not show up. They're just a dead team, man, just kind of like Miami was, although Miami was going into a really tough spot. This was a better spot for Philadelphia to show up and do something, and that did not happen at all. That was just absolutely horrible. Let's move to today. We got a huge slate of games. We got college basketball. We'll start with that. It's a huge slate of games today because it's a Tuesday, so it's a pretty big slate. It's not like a Saturday slate, but going back to my bread and butter a little bit on some of these games here and some of these spots, and I would say I would be careful with a couple of these spots that look like trap lines, like Purdue, Indiana. Purdue's up from 9.5 to 10, but I think KenPom has this at 11. I think Indiana is still not being valued where they should be. Like, Purdue is a legit team. Everybody knows that. Like, I think Purdue is like pretty much being lined. Like, they're pretty much being valued as they should be as like a top team. I think they're probably a top 2 or 3 team. Indiana is actually way worse than people think they are. So that's the problem. Like, KenPom has them as the 91st ranked team, and they're being lined. They're getting some value just because of their name. Although in this spot, Indiana is going to step it up because they're at home and they're facing their in-state big brother there in Purdue. So that is a motivating factor there. So situationally, the situation does favor Indiana a little bit, but the number I don't think is quite good enough to get there. If it gets up a little bit higher, then yeah, maybe that would support like a play on Indiana there. And this game is Peacock only. Like, why do they keep doing this, man? Just like the Chiefs Dolphins playoff game there. These sports are now making these games Peacock only just to try to force you to buy this extra streaming service. It's NBC, I guess, that's doing it because it is their network. It's like, really, like, come on. I would not give in to that. I hope this is going to backfire on them. Like, people are not going to want to buy like a million different streaming services and be required to buy one of those just to watch this game. Like, it's so ridiculous. I just happen to have Peacock, so I can watch this game if I want to, but it's like, I hate it, man. I hate it. I think I get it through my service provider. And then the other game that looks quite trappish is this Kansas one at Oklahoma State, but there isn't really much of a situation that I would say supports at least me jumping in on this game. Kansas is actually down from 7.5 to 6.5, but I think KenPom has this line at 10 or something like that. And again, Kansas, I think, is being overvalued. Like, everybody is talking about how they're like a national title contender. I mean, that's kind of always the case with Kansas. They just run off of their like name recognition. They're good, but I don't think they're a title contender this year. I'm sorry. I don't think so. I think they're maybe somewhere around like the 15th best team in college basketball, somewhere in that range, at least as it stands right now. The problem is that Oklahoma State is still not being valued where they should be. They are horrible. And I got caught playing them. They did not have a good game in what I thought was at least a good spot against Iowa State, who is a team that is more defensive than offensive and was laying a ton of points. So KenPom is Oklahoma State at the 108th ranked team. I mean, the one thing they have going for them, I guess, is that they're one of the unluckiest teams so far, according to KenPom. So there is that, but I don't want to get involved in that, man. When Oklahoma State, just because people know the name, I think they're being overvalued as well. Kansas is certainly being overvalued too, but like Oklahoma State, just like what I said with Indiana, I think they're worse than people even think they are. So I'm not getting involved in those games. Let's go to the games I'm actually on. Try to get this done more quickly than sometimes I do. TCU at Cincinnati. I'm going to lay the points with Cincinnati in this one. Cincinnati, looks like they're sitting at 3.5 right now. I actually laid 2.5. I apologize. It was 2.5 not that long ago, and now it's up to 3.5. I think KenPom, where does he have this line? Probably somewhere in the 3 vicinity, I would say. He has it at 3. So, actually, I think I found a 2.5 that was just kind of like a scraggler, like one of the books was lagging behind, so I just picked it off the 2.5. I think it's mostly 3.5. It might be fine to still do that. I like the Cincinnati side here. I think it's a bad spot for TCU. Like, I'm going back to my bread and butter here, and I'm playing teams that are in letdown spots, man. TCU, how much are they going to have left in the tank, man? Look at the gauntlet that they just faced. They just had that game at Kansas. That was 3 games ago, where I think it was like prior to last weekend. They were in Allen Fieldhouse, and they probably could have or should have won that game, and they lost by 2 because of that awful flop by Dickinson on Kansas, who's one of my most hated players. I think most people that follow college basketball probably he is up on the list among the most hated players in college basketball. He's a flop artist, a cheap player, dirty player. TCU lost that game by 2 on that. Then they still showed up in the next game and beat Oklahoma because they stepped it up because Oklahoma is a pretty highly ranked team at least. So TCU stepped it up for that one too. And then what did they do in their last game? They beat Houston by 1. And they were losing early in that game, I think probably by double digits. And they came back, got back within that game, played a nice close game battle against Houston, wound up winning the game against Houston. And I think they won on like a late shot too. I think that was at home, so I think the crowd rushed the court. So in a span of 3 games, they almost won at the team that was ranked 2 at the time in Kansas. They came back home and beat the number 9 ranked team at the time, Oklahoma, and then they beat the now number 2 ranked Houston at home on their own floor and like stormed the court. After those 3 games, man, how are you going to get up from the next game? You're going to Cincinnati, which is going to be kind of an unfamiliar venue because they're new to the Big 12. TCU really, they've only played 3 other road games this season, and not really impressive in those games, really, except for the Kansas one. The Kansas one, they played really well and stepped it up in that one. I think took Kansas by surprise. But in the other ones, they beat Georgetown by 1, which is really bad because Georgetown sucks. And then they went to Hawaii. I don't know. Hawaii's, who cares? Not impressive. They won the game by 14, but it's not impressive at all. And now they have to go to Cincinnati, which, again, like I said, this is an unfamiliar venue for TCU. And Cincinnati, I believe they play at a much slower pace than TCU does. And with Cincinnati being at home, I think they're going to be able to control the pace of this game more so. They're going to be able to slow the game down a little bit. And Cincinnati is the better defense of the 2 teams as well. TCU has the better offense, but Cincinnati plays the better defense. So it's going to be kind of a collision of styles here. And I don't necessarily like laying points with a team that you expect to be like the better defense out of the 2 and the slower pace team out of the 2, but the line isn't that high. So 2.5 is what I got. I think it's at 3.5 most places, but TCU, this is just such a bad spot, a letdown spot. Oh, and who do they have up next? They have Iowa State, who's also now ranked. Iowa State's been playing really well, and Iowa State's the other team. They're the only 2 teams that have beaten Houston so far, TCU and Iowa State. So that's a big game too. Cincinnati's they're like down lower in the standings. They might overlook Cincinnati a little bit, man. This is a sandwich spot, I would say. Cincinnati, I mean, they're coming off a tough game as well. That is true. I believe they just played Baylor pretty tough, if I'm not mistaken. So they lost to Texas in a close game. They played 3 straight, like, tough games as well, kind of. They beat BYU on the road. That was like kind of their like legitimizer game. That was a nice game against BYU. And then I went against Cincinnati when they came back home off of that because that was such a big win. And they dropped the game to Texas, who I believe was unranked at the time, or maybe they were just borderline on the rankings, which is where they are now. No. It actually says what the ranking was then. They were 25th. So they had just gotten into the rankings. Cincinnati lost that game. They had Baylor coming up next, and they lost at Baylor as well. I think they're going to be focused on TCU now, man, because TCU is another ranked team. Even though Cincinnati's coming off some tough games, TCU is coming off way tougher games. They're coming off that gauntlet that I just mentioned. So even though Cincinnati's coming off tough games, the Big 12 just is a gauntlet. So, I mean, one of these teams is going to have to be in better shape to win this game, and I think it's going to be Cincinnati. I think the line also looks a little bit suspicious because Cincinnati's not ranked, and they have the worse record than TCU does. TCU is ranked, and people just saw what they just did. They played Kansas almost to a win, probably should have won, and they beat Oklahoma and Houston. So nobody's really going to want TCU in this, or excuse me, nobody's really going to want Cincinnati in this spot, I wouldn't imagine. So the line looks a little bit suspicious, and TCU is the better team, but it's not by that much. I think these teams are close. So I think the Cincinnati being about a 3-point favorite at home, I think is warranted. I think they're probably maybe a point like below TCU in like the power ratings that matter. So I like it. I like the spot for Cincinnati. I think the line's not accounting for the spot, though it is moving up a little bit. So I do like a lot of aspects of that one. So I'm taking it. I'm on Cincinnati in that one. Moving to, what else am I on here? South Carolina -4.5. I think this one keeps moving up, man. So like this one, you might have to get on this quickly. It opened 3. I jumped on it at 4.5, and it's up to 5.5 now. It looks like it might even be going further than that. I don't know what you can get on this one now. 5s, 5.5s. I think there might be some variance in this line. At least they're playing Georgia. I like the spot, man. And KenPom, I think, has this line at 4, so it's a little slightly dicey as the line creeps up more. And indeed, South Carolina is coming off an overtime game against Missouri, but Missouri's not a very good team. And South Carolina, I think that was on the road, though, so Missouri was actually a favorite. South Carolina was coming off a real embarrassing loss to Alabama, though Alabama's way better than people think they are, and they're starting to turn it on now and show that. But South Carolina, they played a close game into overtime against Missouri. Missouri isn't a very good team, really, like by their record at least, even though Missouri was actually favored at home in that game. I think South Carolina is going to take that as kind of a scare and maybe like scare them back into focus there because they played a team that was, I think, below 500 at the time, maybe into overtime. So I think that's going to serve to refocus South Carolina a little bit in this game, whereas Georgia, what did they just do? They're in a massive, massive hangover spot, man. I don't want anything to do with Georgia right now, and they're in a sandwich spot. They just lost to Tennessee in this weird roller coaster of a game where Georgia was way, way ahead early in the game. Throughout the entire first half, they were way ahead, beating Tennessee, who was the 5th-ranked team in the country. And then Tennessee was way, way ahead. Tennessee was way ahead of them early on. So it looked like Georgia was maybe just going to get blown out of the building. Tennessee was a 7.5-point favorite on the road. Georgia came all the way back early in the second half to take the lead early in the second half. So Georgia was losing the entire first half. They came back, took the lead, and then had the lead for almost the entire second half. And it looked like Georgia was going to wind up winning the game and pull off this huge upset. They were winning by 8 with 5 minutes left in the game. And then they only scored 1 more point in the rest of the game and wound up losing the game after they completely stalled out. In the final 5 minutes of the game, they scored 1 point, and Tennessee wound up winning the game. I don't know how Georgia's going to get back up off the mat after that, man. They had to mount. I keep saying amount. It's either amass or mount. Either amass or dumbass. I'm a dumbass. Georgia had to put in a huge effort there, man. They had to make that huge comeback, only to wind up falling short against Tennessee. And that was Georgia's first loss since, I believe, November 19th. I think Georgia had won 10 or 11 games in a row before that. So not only is that going to put them in a hangover spot, because that was such a tough game against one of the highest ranked teams in the SEC and in college basketball, that's going to put them in a hangover spot, but it's their first loss in so long that that has a tendency to hang you over into the next game as well. When you lose like a massive win streak like that and you haven't lost in so long, that's going to hang you over too. And now they have to go out on the road to South Carolina. That's not going to be an easy spot. And who does Georgia play next? They play Kentucky, who's ranked 8th in the country right now and one of the other top teams in the SEC. So this is not good at all. This is a hangover spot. This is a spot that broke like a huge win streak for Georgia, and it's a sandwich spot because a look ahead and sandwich spot because they have Kentucky up next. This spot is so bad for Georgia. I'm doing it. I'm on South Carolina. I'm laying the 4.5. And then finally, the other game I'm going to be on is Arkansas +3. This line's moving up on Texas A&M 2.5 to 3. KenPom, I think, has this line at 2. So I like this one too. This is a letdown spot. This is kind of a toad special here. Or what did Texas A&M just do? They just I don't think they upset them. I think they actually were a favorite in the game, but to the average Joe, it looks like an upset. But it was a big win for Texas A&M against Kentucky at home. Texas A&M beat Kentucky in overtime. It was a tough battle against Kentucky. That was a close game throughout most of it. I think a back and forth type of game, roller coaster type of game there. Didn't have the fluctuations that Georgia one did, where Tennessee was way ahead and then Georgia was way ahead. This game was a bit closer the whole time. The Texas A&M was winning for like the whole first half, and not by that much. Then Kentucky got into the lead, and then it was just back and forth for the rest of the game. Wound up going into overtime. Texas A&M finally wound up winning in overtime. Huge win for Texas A&M. Massive, massive win at home. Now they have to go out on the road and play Arkansas, who is winless in the conference. They're sitting at 0-3 in conference and 9-7. Like, really, are you going to be totally focused on Arkansas here? I don't know about that. When you're coming off such a massive, massive high, they have LSU up next, so at least has a better record than Arkansas does, and is ahead of Texas A&M in the conference standings. Even though I don't think LSU is good at all, I just think this is just an awful letdown spot. And if you look at Texas A&M on the road this year, they won their first 2 road games really early on at Ohio State and at SMU. I don't know if those are true road games or not. Maybe they were. But since then, since the SMU one, which SMU is not really that good, that was November 14th. Texas A&M has no road wins since then. They've only played 2 road games since then. They lost by double digits at Virginia, did not do well. And then they lost at Auburn, and Auburn is good. But that Auburn game was also right before the Kentucky game. So that was a pretty big game as well, a step-up game at Auburn, who's now in the lead in the SEC. Auburn been playing really well and has been moving up the rankings too. So those 2 games against Auburn and Kentucky are both huge games. And the LSU game might be bigger than it looks because LSU came into Texas A&M and beat Texas A&M in their house at College Station the game before the Auburn one. So they might be looking ahead to LSU because it's going to be a revenge game, or they want to go out on the road and play tough against LSU. So that could turn this into not only a letdown spot, but a sandwich spot. I like it. I'm on Arkansas +3. I don't know if the line's going to keep going up though. So I don't know, but I like taking the points there. Home underdog in in a spot where Texas A&M's in a letdown and they're laying points on the road. Yeah, let's do it, baby. I like that one. And then I was close to playing Clemson. I'll just throw that out there. I don't know if I can quite do it. They're sitting at 11. It looked like they got down from 13.5 to 11, and now it looks like they're maybe a little bit up from 11 to 11.5. I don't love laying that many points, but I think even though Clemson had been overrated, now they've dropped from the rankings. So I think that might focus them a little bit because they were still ranked and then they dropped out of the rankings, even though they won their last game against Boston College, which not a totally impressive win, but I think that's like a momentum starter for Clemson after they lost to Miami, North Carolina, and Virginia Tech. That Virginia Tech game was tough because they were coming off a tough game against North Carolina. So I think that Boston College win is going to be more of like a momentum starter for Clemson, and they might be a little bit extra motivated because they dropped out of the rankings. Georgia Tech is in a terrible spot coming in. They just played Duke really close at Duke. Georgia Tech was winning the game into the second half. They were winning by double digits somewhere in the middle of the second half and wound up falling just short. And the game was still within like 1 point late in the game. So that's tough for Georgia Tech to come off of. Remember, they played Duke so close and almost lost that game. And now this is going to be their second straight road game. Ken Bum has this line at 13, so it's a spot where there's no way that I want to get involved in Georgia Tech here. And Clemson, I think it's a spot where they might be able to control the pace. I think they're actually a slower pace team than what you would think, but their offensive efficiency is really good. Clemson, even though they play a slow pace, I think they'll be able to control the pace here. They also have one of the most efficient offenses, which is kind of crazy to think about. Ken Bum has them at 14th in adjusted offensive efficiency. Their defense isn't very good, which is weird to see with a slow tempo team. You see a team that shoots that well, but that's what Clemson does. So it's just a bad spot for Georgia Tech, though. Georgia Tech, I think, is going to run into like a pacing clash in this one as well. So I'm tempted to actually do it on Clemson. I don't know if I'm going to quite get there on that one, but that's like the bubble boy on my card right now. It's the game that I'm almost going to get involved in. There's a chance I might wind up doing it, but we'll see about that. But I do like that one. NBA, I have no plays. It's a short NBA card with just 3 games. I don't even know if I want to comment on any of these things. Strongest lean in this one might be to the Phoenix Suns. They're up from 4 to 5, 65% of the cash on them, 64% of the tickets. I just think it's not a good spot it's not really a good spot for either team, but I think it's worse for Sacramento. They're coming off that game that I was on where they took the Bucks into overtime and wound up losing the game. Now this is going to be their 5th straight road game, which is going to be pretty difficult, I think, and kind of a 3rd straight game where you get up emotionally, although they got blown out by Philadelphia before the Milwaukee game. So I think that refocused them for the Milwaukee game. So I liked the spot in the Milwaukee game, but now they're coming off that tough game. Phoenix, the problem that I have with Phoenix is that they're returning from a road trip, but it is only a 3-game road trip. So where they went to the Clippers and got blown out, then they beat the Los Angeles Lakers, which was a nice bounce back spot for Phoenix in that one. And then they beat Portland, but not very impressively. And I mean, can you even beat Portland impressively? Not really. I don't know. Portland sucks. So they're coming home off of that. Because it's Sacramento, I think they might still be focused. And the last time they played Sacramento was in the middle on December 22nd, actually, and they lost fairly badly at Sacramento. So Phoenix might want a little bit of revenge for that in this one as well. So the spot is better for Phoenix, but I just don't want to play them in the return home. I'm not going to quite get there with it. Moving over to hockey real quick before I get out of here. I'm just going to have the one play in hockey that I'll talk about here, which is fading the Calgary Flames. And this is going to be on, what am I going to grab here? Arizona, what can we get here? Plus 143 approximately. Yeah, 143 looks like it's the best price you can get right now on Arizona, even though the market looks like it's against me right now. Moving Calgary up from minus 155 to minus 160 as a home favorite. I don't like that, but I don't see the market percentages yet on this one, so I don't like that it's ticked up on Calgary, but both of these teams have had multiple days off, so they're both kind of in a similar rest spot, but I don't like the spot that Calgary's in because they just beat Vegas, which is a huge win pretty much. You go into Vegas and beat them. They beat them. And the game before that, what did they do? They went into Arizona and they beat Arizona 6-2. Blowout win at Arizona. So Arizona might want a little quick road revenge here. I think this might be a spot where Arizona is going to refocus, and Arizona actually did not play as badly as it looks in that game. That was a bad spot for Arizona too, and I think I might have been on Calgary in that one. I'm not even sure. Calgary wound up going off of minus 140 road favorite, and I think I got them at a cheaper price than that. Minus 140. I think was probably a bit overstating it, a bit too high, and now they're 160 at home. A minus 140 would kind of indicate they should be minus 180 at home, which is kind of ridiculous to think about, but I think that would be too high, especially in a spot like this. But Calgary, Arizona outshot them and outhit them in that game. So I don't think it was as bad as the final score made it look, but that was also a bad spot for Arizona because they were coming off a big win over Boston. I believe they're in the letdown spot there. Now Calgary is in the bad spot. Like I said, both of these teams have had multiple days off. Calgary, they just won that game at Arizona that I just mentioned. Kind of embarrassing for Arizona, losing 6-2. And then Calgary went into Vegas and beat them, and now Arizona's got their shot at revenge. Calgary is returning home as well, though it's only from the 2-game road trip there, so it's not a big road trip. But even so, it is still a road trip return. Arizona, I think maybe got some momentum back after that loss against Calgary. That was really ugly. They got to start the road trip on the right foot and beat Minnesota 6-0. I don't really want to necessarily play a team that's coming off a 6-0 win, but I think that might start momentum for them. I think they might continue the momentum into this game. So I do like that aspect of it too. And Calgary does have Toronto up next, who at least has a better record than Arizona does. And Edmonton after that has been really, really hot. And that's their in-province rival there in Edmonton. So this might be the game, kind of a sandwich-ish type of spot where Calgary might overlook Arizona a little bit. So that's going to do it for me, man. Those are the plays that I'm on today. College basketball, we got Cincinnati -2.5, although I think it's 3.5 most places now, unfortunately. South Carolina -4.5, although I think it's 5.5 at most places now, but I do still like those sides quite a bit. Arkansas +3, and then in NHL, Arizona +143 as the money line dog. That's going to do it for me, man. Let's turn this disaster of yesterday around. We got to get back on the winning foot here, man. It feels like it's the start of a new week because I was off yesterday. So happy Tuesday. Let's get it done. Peace out.